Evening, everybody. Been a while since I've done a talking podcast on my YouTube channel. I've been uploading a lot of videos of me covering a lot of different artists, especially Bob Dylan, and occasionally putting up an original song or two. But I also like to post about books I've read. I've posted quite a few blogcasts or podcasts, whatever you want to call it, of books I've read the past year. And this is one that I just finished. This is, if you can't see it, it's by Thomas Pynchon, and it's called Shadow Ticket. And Thomas Pynchon became one of my favorite authors when I was in college. I read Gravity's Rainbow when I was living in Taiwan and traveling around mainland China. So I kind of have all these associations of Gravity's Rainbow with my first trip to China and my own adventures kind of blended in. And I think I just fell in love with his writing style, as turgid as it might seem to others. I just love the inventiveness of his style. I love his sense of humor, the way he captures dialogue and language especially, and also his imagination and his ability to take you on this epic journey, and you never know quite where it's going to lead you. And I think a lot of those elements are in this book as well. Shadow Ticket, it's his latest book. It just came out last year, and I got it as kind of a birthday present to self a few weeks ago, and have been reading it ever since, kind of sporadically, but I made a marathon effort today to finish the book. I found that this book is has a lot of similarities to his earlier style with Gravity's Rainbow, the Pynchonian language, the Pynchonian characters with their odd names, the sense of humor that percolates throughout the book. He loves to invent songs that are often kind of based on, standard pop formats. And there's plenty of songs in here because this whole story takes place during the Jazz Age. And note that I haven't prepared this talk at all, so I'm just telling you what I think, having just finished reading it and giving you my impressions. But the book takes place sort of during the tail end of the Jazz Age, in the 1930s, on the eve of right before the beginning of World War II. There were a lot of ominous kind of notes in the book about that another war is brewing. So it takes place in the 1930s. It starts in Milwaukee. You get to spend a lot of time in Milwaukee with the main character, Hicks McTaggart, who's a kind of lovable thug or lovable ex-thug, good-hearted, I think, but comes from a kind of a petty, crime background. Has worked as an enforcer. Now he's a private eye or private dick. There's a lot of lingo from the 1920s and 30s in this book. I think Pynchon himself was born in the 30s, so he may have heard some of this lingo growing up, but he certainly did his research, and the way that people talk and the slang that they use, the language, sounds very genuine to me. So you start in Milwaukee, and over the course of the book, the journey takes Hicks McTaggart from Milwaukee to New York City and then on to Europe, where he ends up spending a lot of time in Budapest, hence the cover picture of Budapest in the 1930s at night. That in itself should be a draw to anybody interested in the Jazz Age. What was the Jazz Age like in that part of the world? So there are a lot of scenes of nightclubs and dancing. Hicks McTaggart is a pretty good dancer, and he meets a lot of dance partners, a lot of potential romantic or maybe past romantic partners in the book. So there are a lot of dance hall scenes, which of course speaks to me as a historian of dance hall and nightlife culture from the 1920s and 30s. And again, I feel there's, even though this is largely a work of imagination, it's a work of fiction, but there's a lot of sort of genuine maybe research that goes into a book like this. I don't know how he researched it. I haven't looked up any information on the internet about this book. I just read it blind, having read almost all of Pynchon's previous works. I just wanted to read the book without any reviews, any filters, just read it on my own, get my own impression of it. And if you're a Pynchon fan, I recommend you do the same. Just go into it and read it like you would any other Pynchon novel. It's not nearly as complicated as Gravity's Rainbow or Against the Day, those huge epic novels that he's written in the past, or even Mason and Dixon. And those are much longer, more complicated. He's taken on a style, kind of reminds me of Bob Dylan in a way. Gravity's Rainbow is sort of the equivalent of Dylan's albums from the 60s, with a lot of kind of surrealism and lyrics, verses that go on forever. But later, Bob Dylan became more pithy. He became a tighter writer of song lyrics, and it's kind of the same with Pynchon. His last few novels have been shorter, tighter, more easier to understand. I mean, again, you're mainly following Hicks McTaggart. You're following his journey. So if there's any hero in the story, even though he's kind of, in a way, an anti-hero, like all of Pynchon's main characters, he's not exactly a heroic figure, but you can empathize with him. You feel a sympathy with him, and you follow him on his journey, which takes him halfway across the world, where he meets all kinds of interesting and exotic characters and gets involved in a Pynchonian way in all sorts of cabals and conspiracies, which he is just kind of dimly aware of. So that's the Pynchonian eye, right? So it's easier to understand. It's I wouldn't say it's a quick read. It's not an easy read. I mean, this is literature. You really have to dwell on the words, imbibe his sentences, really enjoy the flavor of his prose, because it's so special. And, all of the features that I've come to love about Pynchon over the decades of reading him are in this novel in one way or another. So his flair for puns, his sometimes ridiculous sense of humor, occasional flights of fancy. There's a robot that appears in one section of the story, a Czech robot nonetheless. And I believe that's where the term robot was invented. So again, Pynchon the historian. There's a lot of history in here. You learn something about Hungary and its partitioning after World War I. You learn something about the Balkans. You certainly learn a lot about Prohibition era America. So when I said it's on the eve of the war, I think to be more accurate, it's in the early 1930s, before the end of Prohibition. So kind of the tail end of the Jazz Age. And you learn a lot about the different rackets that were going on, and the culture of the speakeasies that was happening in America at the time, which he calls speaks, the speaks. And there's a lot, I think, for a historian to chew on in this novel. A lot that feels authentic and genuine. But there's a lot of Pynchonian again, language and kind of fanciful imagination in the novel as well. There's a U-boat, plays a big role in the story. All sorts of contraptions. Towards the end of the story, you find yourself, riding along with the story on various motorcycles. There's a blimp that appears, or a zeppelin. So all kinds of conveyances, and again, it's very Pynchon-esque, this idea of following a character on the arc of a journey across time and space with on all sorts of different conveyances, meeting all sorts of interesting characters along the way who take him on this, picaresque journey. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. So that's another lovable thing about this novel. It definitely keeps up a good pace. It doesn't sag in any part. I felt that the storyline kind of moved along at a nice brisk pace. Just when you're kind of getting tired of the scene in Milwaukee, he whisks you on this adventure outward into the world. So I think all of those are great features of this novel. It's not going to be for everybody. Certainly if you like, tight, very kind of tight, concentrated prose and a really tight storyline, this is not for you. The storyline meanders a bit. The characters kind of get lost in the story a little bit. Again, reminiscent, though not nearly as grandiose as Gravity's Rainbow and the journey of Tyrone Slothrop through post-war Europe. But there's a bit of an analogy there. I feel like Hicks McTaggart and Slothrop are kind of similar characters, certainly not identical, but they're both kind of drawn into a journey that they're not really in control of. Maybe they're being manipulated by others towards different ends. And again, they have kind of romantic and other adventures along the way. But I would say, compared to Slothrop, Hicks McTaggart is a little bit more maybe seasoned, a little bit more world weary, I would say, than Slothrop, the young American lieutenant at the end of World War II. It's not nearly as fanciful as Gravity's Rainbow. It largely stays, I would say, on the plane of reality, but there, like I said, there are moments when you feel like he's definitely using some kind of, what do you call it, imaginary realism, kind of the, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that style, where he's injecting certain elements that are definitely not grounded in our notion of reality. There's a kind of psychokinetic aspect to part of the story with characters that apport objects from one place to another. So there are kind of wavelengths in a Pynchonian way that operate throughout the story that are paranormal, supernormal, and that definitely jibes with some of his earlier work, like Gravity's Rainbow, like Against the Day, perhaps, and certainly like Mason and Dixon, where you have characters that kind of come out that are imaginary. So again, the plot, I would say, is not necessarily the most important part of the story, but if you put it in the context of other books that he's written, he is a kind of literary historian, and here he's bringing us into the world that existed right before World War II broke out. So, he's dealing with racism, he's dealing with anti-Semitism. There's a lot in the book about, the growing attacks on Jews living in Europe. There there are a lot of kind of breaking down of stereotypes within American society of the different ethnic communities, the Italians, etc. There, so he's dealing with issues that I think are still obviously relevant today. Um, he's digging into the kind of prehistory of World War II, in a way arguing that the circumstances of World War II were caused by the outcome of World War I. I think he makes that very clear in the story. And it's interesting how he has this kind of continual, you could even call it obsession with Europe, before, during, and after World War II. He himself was in the military, I believe, in the Navy as a young man. Although it was after World War II, he was born too late to be a soldier in World War II. But obviously, he has great interest in kind of the origins, the consequences of that great war in modern history. And I think his interests go obviously much deeper than that. He's written about other time periods as well. But he seems to have this he seems to keep wanting to go back to understanding more deeply the culture and the society and the vectors of politics and all of the different forces that were leading the world into another war. So I think that's another feature of this book that makes it well worth reading, whether you're a historian or just interested in that time period. All in all, I'd say highly recommend this book to any Pynchon fan. I think it kind of rekindles some of the best aspects of his work without drowning you in segues, in kind of random departures like some of his earlier stuff did, which I think, made it very difficult for people to get into him in the first place. But I think this novel, again, to use the Dylan analogy, it's much tighter. It's much, it's much easier to follow the line of the story than some of his earlier works. It's a bit of a detective novel. It's a bit of a noir. It's definitely got a noir kind of aspect to it. All these kind of shady, suspicious characters, a lot of, again, nightclub scenes, a lot of criminal rackets kind of going on. Shadow Ticket, the name itself kind of gives you a sense of that this is a shadowy world. I'm not even going to talk about kind of the main plot because I wouldn't say it's that important. You can read the liner notes, you can read the blurb on Amazon or whatever to kind of get a sense of the plot. But I don't think that's super important to the enjoyment. Again, you don't read Pynchon for plots so much as you read him for language, for imagination, for transporting you into different times and places, into different landscapes, meeting fascinating people, fascinating and mysterious people along the way, having all sorts of unexpected adventures. That's kind of the reason to read Pynchon in the first place. So I'll leave it at that. Highly recommend it. Shadow Ticket. Go out and buy your copy. The hard copy, reasonable price. Definitely worth having in your library. Good night.